Yo, welcome back to the channel. I'm Eddie Ortega, and today we need to talk about project planning. It's the new year, everybody's excited about their new projects, people have done their goals and their resolutions and their thing. One of the things that I see happens often is that people don't have a framework or a way to go about starting their projects, and so they just kind of fizzle out, you know? It's just a thing that happens to all of us. So I've been a producer in games for a very long time. I've worked on tiny projects, big projects, independent little things, have managed teams of various sizes. And I want to share with you one methodology that I've used across all my years as a producer that hopefully will help you with your project. And this is the simple idea of thinking about your project in loops. Loops, man, it's all loops. What do I mean by that? When we're new to project planning, what happens is that people tend to think about their project and their plan and their big vision as this sort of linear thing that's going to just progress. You know, we're just going to start at the beginning, build up some momentum, try some things out, and then, you know, we're gonna have all this energy, and throughout the middle, we're just gonna push through, and then at the end, one big push and it gets done and the project happens. And this might work in like small scales, but if you're trying to do something for a month or a year, you're trying to make something really big, like a video game or like a film or even a comic book, whatever you're trying to make, it gets to be pretty hard. And it gets to be pretty hard, not because you don't know what you're doing or because you can't make it. It gets pretty hard because that's just not how human motivation works. And that's definitely not how like projects work, right? You need to have time and flexibility to make mistakes and figure things out, and even just for life to happen. So if we don't create the framework that allows us to be flexible around those changes, what happens is you'll get one misstep and your whole plan goes out the window, and so does your motivation. So instead, we'll work in loops. And the best way I've found to do that is to break your project down into 3 main segments and then to organize them around a specific time frame. So the 3 stages are vision, execution, and reflection, okay? And the time frame, you get to play around with it, but let's say for starting point, we're gonna say it's 1 month. And so the temptation is gonna be to put them out in time, in a line. Instead, we feed them into each other, right? So vision is going to be the stage where I am thinking about what my idea requires of me. Like, I'm trying to make the idea as clear as possible. Execution is all about just making it happen to the best of your ability, just doing what you gotta do to make whatever you set in your vision come true. And then you need to create a time for reflection. You need to create a dedicated time where you're going to look at what you've executed on. Maybe you show it to somebody, maybe you're going to test it out to see if you're actually hitting what your original vision was. And based on that reflection, that feedback, whatever it is, you go back to vision, and then you just keep going on this loop over and over and over, right? So let's say that my loop is gonna be a month long, right? I got 4 weeks inside of a month. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, well, maybe for the first week, it's all going to be vision. The next 2 weeks, all execution, and the final week, reflection. So if my project was writing a short story, during the first week, all I'm trying to do is figuring out the outline, the beats, what is it gonna be? I'm not actually trying to make it happen. I'm just kind of getting the flow down, right? And that's setting me up for the execution stage where I'm gonna spend all of my time just trying to really write out the story in the way that I envisioned it, right? And maybe for that last week, all I'm gonna do is test the material out, show it to people, show it to a friend, read it to yourself, think about whether it's what you wanted it to be. Now, the interesting thing is you could play around with the scale of your loop and figure out how many times you wanna go on this loop. We could take that same idea and then just scale it down to a 1 week long loop, right? Now, instead of over a month, I'm just gonna do it over a couple of days. First couple of days is vision, the next couple of days is execution, and then at the end, maybe over the weekend, it's reflection. Now, once you start thinking in this way, it gets to be pretty interesting because you're really just trying to figure out what is a pacing, a rhythm that feels good to you. You try out the month loop and maybe that's your thing. Well, stack that up over time and see how that goes. You would get about a loop each month. And if your project is super big, maybe this is what it requires. But if it's just yourself and you're doing something relatively small, then you could stack a bunch of loops right over just a couple months, right? So if you were doing a 1 week long loop of this process, for just 3 months, you'd have something that looks like this. you basically get to go on that same journey 12 times. And now with 12 loops, there's a lot of room for error. There's a lot of room to play and to figure things out and to make mistakes and to say, okay, I got some feedback. I'm reflecting on that. That's gonna help me adjust my vision. I got like 11 more loops to go, so I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna give it another shot, and then in that loop I'm gonna learn something. So this way of doing it, it just gives you a lot more ability to scale things up and down, and it really just makes your whole project more resilient and more reliable. Once I understood this, like, things just got a lot easier for me. I know it sounds kind of like I'm simplifying it and it sounds like it's magic. I kind of think it is. I think once you start thinking in this way, a lot will change for you in terms of how you approach the actual setting of the goals. By the way, one caveat. It's possible a lot of you will look at this and say, well, isn't that the same as like sprint planning? You know, in the production communities, this is like a very common strategy. And the answer is sort of yes. But the specific bit that's important in this particular idea is thinking about the fact that you're going on a spiral upwards, right? So even when you call something a sprint, I think until you connect that you're going on a cycle, it doesn't really shift your mindset correctly, right? Because that's still kind of like running a straight line, but in different bursts, right? So instead of sprints where you're running and slowing down and running and slowing down, we're thinking about going on a dance, on a cycle that keeps evolving. All right, and that's it. That's what I mean when I say you gotta think of your project in terms of loops. This technique is something that you can refine. You can get better at it. With every attempt, you could just get a little bit more adept at figuring out what is the right kind of loop. And once you start thinking this way, you just get galaxy brain, right? You start to be able to see any production, no matter what scale, into something that you could kind of like stretch out and manipulate inside your head. And it's really nice. So I encourage you to try it. I would love to hear if this is a technique that you've tried in the past or that you want to try. Please let me know about it in the comments. If you're actually interested in seeing me prepare a whole project using this technique, I made another video where I actually go step by step in planning a production for a video game that I'm working on this year. So if you think that would be interesting to you, go ahead and check that out. All right, see you on the next one.